The planet Valyra was glowing with celebration. Tall crystal towers shined under the purple sky. Long bridges of silver light connected the royal palace to the great city below. Thousands of ships floated quietly in the air, carrying guests from across the galaxy. Tonight was not an ordinary night. Tonight was the royal wedding of Princess Valyra, the only daughter of King Thalrin, ruler of Valyra. Every powerful family in the galaxy had sent representatives. Alien nobles walked through the palace halls wearing beautiful robes made from shining fabric. Golden banners hung from the walls. Soft music echoed through the giant halls. Everything looked peaceful. But there was something strange about this wedding. Something that many guests could not stop talking about. Among the invited guests, there was a human. The humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. They were known mostly as soldiers, explorers, and fighters. Many alien races believed humans were unpredictable and dangerous. They respected their strength, but they did not trust them. So when the invitation list became public, one name surprised everyone: Marcus Hale, a human warrior from Earth. As the guests entered the royal hall, whispers spread through the crowd. Why would the king invite a human? This is a royal wedding, not a battlefield. Humans bring trouble wherever they go. At the far end of the hall, near one of the large windows, Marcus Hale stood quietly. He was taller than most of the aliens around him. His dark uniform was simple and practical, very different from the colorful clothing of the nobles. A small metal badge rested on his chest, showing the symbol of Earth's military. Marcus did not look nervous. He stood calmly, his eyes moving slowly across the hall. Watching. Observing. Marcus Hale had spent most of his life in dangerous places. Wars, border conflicts, and rescue missions across distant systems had trained him to notice small details others ignored. And tonight, something felt wrong. The palace was beautiful. The music was perfect. The guests were smiling. But Marcus could feel tension in the air. Across the hall, groups of alien nobles kept looking toward him. Some stared with curiosity, others looked annoyed. One tall alien with blue skin whispered loudly to his companion, "A human at the royal wedding. The king must be desperate." Marcus heard the comment, but did not react. He had heard worse things before. Instead, his attention moved to the palace guards. They stood around the hall wearing silver armor. Their weapons were advanced energy rifles used only by royal security. But Marcus noticed something unusual. The guards looked tense. Some kept touching their communication devices. Others kept scanning the crowd more often than necessary. Marcus folded his arms slowly. Something is bothering them, he thought. At the far end of the hall, large golden doors slowly opened. The music changed. The guests turned their attention toward the entrance. Princess Valyra stepped into the hall. She wore a long white dress that shimmered like starlight. Small glowing stones were woven into the fabric, making it look as if tiny stars were moving across her gown. The crowd became silent, so she walked slowly toward the center of the hall where the ceremony would begin. But as Marcus watched her, he noticed something unexpected. The princess was smiling, but her eyes did not match her smile. They looked worried, afraid. For a brief moment, her eyes moved across the crowd. Then they stopped. On him. The human. Marcus and the princess looked at each other for only a second, but in that moment, Marcus understood something. The princess was not simply nervous about the wedding. She looked like someone expecting trouble. Marcus slowly shifted his position near the window. From there, he could see more of the palace entrance and the upper balconies. More guards stood above the hall. Too many guards. Marcus quietly took a deep breath. This is not just a wedding, he thought. Yet this place feels like a battlefield waiting to happen. Across the hall, Two alien guests stood near the entrance. They were speaking softly to each other. Marcus could not hear their words, but their body language caught his attention. They looked toward the guards, then toward the princess, then toward the doors. One of them touched a small device hidden in his sleeve. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. That was not normal. A moment later, the music became louder as the ceremony prepared to begin. But Marcus no longer cared about the music. His attention moved across every entrance, every balcony, every guard. Something dangerous was about to happen. He could feel it. Years of battle had taught him to trust that feeling, and right now that feeling was screaming at him. The alien nobles continued talking, laughing, but enjoying the celebration. They had no idea what might be coming. Marcus looked again at the princess. She was now standing beside her father, King Thalrin, who was preparing to begin the wedding ceremony. The king looked calm. But Marcus noticed something important. The king was also watching the room carefully, not like a father at a wedding, but like a leader expecting danger. Marcus slowly straightened his posture. If trouble came tonight, he would be ready. Because sometimes, the most dangerous moment in the galaxy was when everyone believed they were safe. The royal hall of Valyra was filled with soft music and polite conversations. But beneath the calm celebration there was a quiet tension that only a few people seemed to notice. Marcus Hale stood near the tall crystal window, watching the movement of the guests with careful attention. The view outside showed the glowing city stretching across the horizon, ships hovering peacefully above the towers, and the distant mountains shining under the violet sky. It was beautiful, but Marcus did not allow the beauty to distract him. Years of training had taught him that danger often hides behind the most peaceful moments. His eyes slowly moved across the hall again, observing every guest, every guard, and every entrance. The alien nobles continued whispering about him. Some stared openly at the human warrior, curious about why someone like him had been invited to such an important royal event. Humans rarely appeared in the central systems of the galaxy, and even when they did, it was usually during trade negotiations or military operations. To seeing a human standing quietly among royal families from dozens of star systems was unusual. A group of tall, silver-skinned diplomats spoke quietly near one of the long banquet tables, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with clear confusion on their faces. To them he looked simple and unimpressive compared to the elegant alien guests wearing bright ceremonial armor and decorated robes. Yet something about his calm posture made them uncomfortable. The human did not look like someone trying to fit in. He looked like someone studying a situation. Marcus noticed how many eyes were on him, but he ignored the attention. Instead, he continued studying the palace guards. The guards stood in perfect formation around the hall, but their behavior was not normal for a celebration. Some guards were watching the entrances too closely, while others were quietly communicating through small devices attached to their helmets. Marcus had seen this type of tension before, during military briefings before an operation. It was the behavior of soldiers who expected trouble, but did not know exactly when it would arrive. The human warrior slowly turned his head and noticed two guards positioned near the upper balcony that overlooked the hall. They were not watching the guests or the ceremony. They were watching the doors. At the center of the hall, the wedding ceremony was beginning. Princess Valyra stood beside her father, King Thalrin, while royal attendants prepared the ceremonial platform. The glowing floor beneath them projected ancient symbols from Valyra's history, each one representing unity, peace, and loyalty to the kingdom. Guests gathered closer to the center, forming a wide circle around the platform so they could watch the ceremony clearly. The groom, a noble commander from a powerful allied world, stood proudly near the princess. Many of the guests admired the alliance this marriage represented, because it promised peace and stability across several star systems. The atmosphere should have been joyful and hopeful, Yet Marcus noticed that the princess still looked uneasy. While the royal priest began speaking the opening words of the ceremony, Princess Valyra's attention briefly drifted away from the platform. Her eyes moved across the crowd slowly, as if she was searching for something. For a moment, they paused on Marcus again. The human noticed the glance immediately. It was not curiosity this time. It was recognition. The princess quickly looked away and returned her attention to the ceremony, but that brief moment confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion. The princess knew something was wrong. Whether she knew the exact danger or only felt the same tension Marcus sensed was unclear, but she was clearly not comfortable with the situation unfolding around her. Marcus stepped slightly away from the window and moved closer to one of the tall columns supporting the palace ceiling. From this position, he could see the entrances, the balconies, and the ceremonial platform at the same time. It was a strategic position, something a soldier instinctively searched for in unfamiliar environments. As he quietly adjusted his stance, he noticed movement near the far entrance of the hall. A group of late guests had just arrived. They were dressed like merchants from a distant trade guild, carrying small gift containers meant for the royal family. Nothing about them appeared unusual at first glance, but Marcus watched them closely. One of the newcomers walked with slightly uneven steps, as if hiding extra weight under his robes. Another guest briefly lifted his sleeve to adjust something on his wrist before lowering it again quickly. Marcus had seen this kind of behavior many times during covert operations. People carrying hidden weapons often moved carefully to avoid revealing their equipment. The human warrior kept his eyes on them without turning his head directly toward them. The group slowly blended into the crowd, placing themselves among the other guests as if they had every right to be there. None of the nobles around them seemed suspicious. The music continued, the ceremony progressed, and the royal priest spoke about unity between worlds and peace between civilizations. But Marcus noticed something else. One of the palace guards on the upper balcony had also noticed the newcomers. The guard shifted slightly, adjusting his weapon while watching them closely. For a moment, Marcus and the guard shared the same silent understanding across the hall. Something was not right. Meanwhile, the ceremony moved forward. King Thalrin stepped forward to speak, his voice calm and powerful as he addressed the gathered guests. He spoke about the future of the kingdom, about the importance of alliances, and about the hope that the marriage of his daughter would bring peace to the surrounding systems. The crowd listened respectfully. Many of the nobles nodded with approval, and to them this moment represented stability and cooperation between powerful worlds. Few of them realized how fragile that peace truly was. Marcus studied the group of late arrivals again. They had separated now, spreading through the crowd to different positions around the hall. Each one seemed to be slowly positioning themselves closer to the center where the royal family stood. The human warrior felt the same instinct he had trusted on countless battlefields beginning to grow stronger inside his mind. Something was about to happen, and it would happen soon. He shifted his weight slightly and looked once more toward the princess. Princess Valyra had finished repeating the ceremonial vows, and now stood quietly beside her father again. The expression on her face remained calm, but Marcus noticed that her hands were clenched tightly at her sides. She was waiting for something. Perhaps she was waiting for the ceremony to end, or perhaps she was waiting for the moment when the hidden danger finally revealed itself. Marcus slowly relaxed his shoulders and prepared himself mentally. He did not know exactly what would happen next, but he knew one thing with certainty. If violence broke out inside this palace hall, the alien nobles and diplomats would panic. The guards would try to control the situation, but chaos would spread quickly among such a large crowd. And in that chaos, the royal family would become the primary target. Marcus Hale had attended the wedding as a guest, but in his mind he was already preparing for something very different. If trouble came to Valyra tonight, the human warrior would not stand quietly in the crowd. He would fight. The royal ceremony continued with calm music and polite applause, but the quiet tension inside the hall had now grown into something heavier. Marcus Hale stood near the great column, carefully watching the guests who had entered late. From a distance, they looked ordinary, just more visitors arriving to celebrate the royal wedding, but Marcus had spent enough time in dangerous places to understand how easily danger could hide behind polite smiles and formal clothing. The group had now separated into different parts of the hall, each one slowly moving closer toward the central platform where Princess Valyra and King Thalrin stood. The human warrior did not move suddenly or draw attention to himself. Instead, he watched patiently, letting his eyes study every detail of their movement, while the ceremony continued around him. At the center of the hall, the royal priest began the next part of the ancient Valyrian wedding ritual. A soft golden light rose from the ceremonial platform, surrounding the princess and her future husband in glowing symbols of unity. The alien nobles gathered closer, fascinated by the beautiful display of royal tradition. Many guests lifted small recording devices to capture the moment for their homeworlds. To most of the people inside the palace, this was simply a joyful celebration of peace and alliance. Yet Marcus could see the growing signs of danger that others ignored. One of the suspicious guests quietly adjusted something beneath his robe again, his movements careful and deliberate. But another guest slowly turned his body toward the nearest group of palace guards, studying their positions as if calculating the best moment to act. Marcus's instincts grew stronger with every passing second. His mind began building possible scenarios, the same way it always did during combat missions. If these people were planning an attack, they would wait until the ceremony reached its most important moment, when the attention of every guest was focused on the royal family. The noise of the celebration would hide the first moments of chaos. Panic would spread quickly through the crowd, and in that confusion, the attackers would move directly toward the king or the princess. Marcus had seen similar tactics used by insurgent groups on distant colonies, where large public gatherings created perfect opportunities for sudden attacks. The human warrior slowly shifted his position again, pretending to examine the decorations along the wall while giving himself a clearer view of the central platform. From this angle, he could see the princess, the king, the groom, and nearly every entrance to the hall. His eyes briefly moved toward the upper balcony where the palace guards stood ready. One of them had already noticed the suspicious guests earlier, and now that same guard appeared even more alert. His weapon remained lowered out of respect for the ceremony, but his stance was ready for immediate action. Marcus understood the silent message being shared between them. They both sensed that something dangerous was approaching. Meanwhile, the ceremony reached the moment when the princess and her future husband would exchange the final vows. The music softened, and the priest spoke in a slow, ceremonial voice that echoed through the great hall. Princess Valyra stepped forward, her glowing dress moving gently with each step. The crowd watched in silence as the groom prepared to speak his vow of loyalty to the kingdom and to his future queen. For a brief moment, the hall felt completely peaceful again. The guests smiled, the music continued, and the golden lights of the platform reflected across the shining walls of the palace. But Marcus noticed something important at that exact moment. One of the suspicious guests near the back of the crowd raised his hand slightly and touched the device hidden under his sleeve. It was a small motion, barely noticeable among hundreds of people standing close together. Yet immediately after that signal, the other members of the group subtly changed their posture. But their calm appearance disappeared for a fraction of a second as they prepared themselves. The human warrior's eyes narrowed as the truth became clear in his mind. The signal had just been given. The attack was about to begin. Marcus slowly straightened his posture, preparing his body for sudden movement. He knew that if he acted too early, he might create panic before the guards could respond. But if he waited too long, the attackers might reach the royal platform before anyone could stop them. Timing was everything. The hall remained silent as the groom began speaking his vow, his voice echoing through the ceremonial chamber, while the crowd listened respectfully. Then everything changed. The enormous palace doors at the far end of the hall exploded inward with a thunderous blast that shook the entire building. The bright sparks and smoke filled the entrance as the heavy golden doors crashed against the floor. For a split second, the entire hall froze in shock. The music stopped, the guests turned in confusion, and the palace guards reacted instantly by raising their weapons toward the entrance. From the smoke stepped a group of heavily armed figures wearing dark combat armor marked with the symbol of a rebel faction that had fought against Valyra for years. Their weapons were already raised, and their leader moved forward with terrifying confidence, as if he had expected no resistance at all. Behind him, more rebels rushed through the destroyed doorway, spreading across the entrance while aiming their weapons toward the central platform. Panic exploded through the crowd almost instantly. Alien nobles shouted in fear as they tried to escape the hall. Some guests dropped their devices and ran toward the side exits while others froze in place, unable to understand what was happening. The peaceful celebration transformed into chaos within seconds. The palace guards fired first, sending bright beams of energy toward the attackers. But the rebels had clearly prepared for this moment. Several of them activated portable shield generators that absorbed the first wave of defensive fire. The rebels began moving forward quickly, pushing through the frightened crowd with clear purpose. Their target was obvious: Princess Valyra. Marcus did not hesitate anymore. The moment he saw the rebels advancing toward the platform, his soldier instincts took control. The human warrior moved through the chaos with calm precision, stepping past panicked guests while keeping his eyes locked on the attackers. One of the palace guards near him was struck by enemy fire and collapsed, dropping his energy rifle onto the polished floor. Marcus reached the weapon before it slid too far away. The human warrior lifted the alien rifle smoothly, his hands adjusting to the unfamiliar design with surprising speed. Years of combat experience allowed him to understand the weapon's basic controls within seconds. He raised the rifle and aimed toward the advancing rebels, who were now only a short distance from the royal platform. Around him, the palace hall had become a battlefield, and the human warrior had just stepped into the fight. The moment Marcus Hale lifted the fallen guard's rifle, the chaos around him seemed to slow inside his mind. To everyone else inside the palace hall, the situation had become a storm of panic, shouting, and flashing weapons. Alien nobles ran in every direction. Guards fired desperately at the attackers, and the rebels continued pushing forward through the frightened crowd. But for Marcus, years of combat had trained his mind to become calm in the middle of danger. He did not focus on the fear around him. He focused only on the battlefield forming inside the wedding hall. The rebels had entered with a clear plan. Their leader moved directly toward the royal platform while several of his fighters spread across the hall to block the guards and control the crowd. Their armor was dark and heavily reinforced, designed to absorb energy blasts from security weapons. Portable shields protected the first wave of attackers, allowing them to advance even while palace guards fired from different directions. Marcus immediately recognized the strategy. The rebels wanted to reach the princess quickly before the royal guards could organize a proper defense. If they captured her, the entire kingdom of Valyra would be forced into negotiations. Marcus stepped forward through the crowd with careful movements, keeping the rifle steady in his hands. The alien weapon felt heavier than human military rifles, but its controls were surprisingly simple. As he studied the weapon, he noticed a small glowing switch near the trigger. Instinctively, he adjusted it to a higher power setting. A bright indicator light turned red, signaling that the weapon was now capable of penetrating stronger armor. One of the rebels noticed Marcus moving closer and raised his weapon toward him. The rebel expected to see a frightened guest, but instead he saw a calm human warrior already aiming back. Marcus fired first. The bright beam from the rifle struck the rebel's armor directly in the chest, pushing him backward with enough force to break the shield protecting his unit. The attacker crashed against a marble pillar and dropped his weapon. Several nearby rebels turned toward Marcus immediately, surprised to see someone fighting back from inside the crowd. Marcus did not stay in one place. He moved quickly behind a long banquet table as energy blasts streaked through the air toward him. The heavy table absorbed the shots, its metal frame sparking under the impact. Marcus leaned around the edge and fired again, hitting another rebel who had been trying to move closer to the royal platform. Meanwhile, the palace guards were beginning to regroup. The sudden appearance of the human warrior fighting alongside them gave them a brief moment to reorganize their positions. A squad of guards near the upper balcony moved into better firing positions, directing their weapons toward the rebels advancing on the central platform. Their energy blasts now came in more controlled bursts rather than random shots, forcing several attackers to retreat behind the decorative pillars scattered throughout the hall. At the center of the chaos, Princess Valyra stood beside her father as royal security tried to escort them away from the platform. The groom and several royal attendants quickly moved to shield the princess from incoming fire, while guards attempted to clear a path toward a secure exit corridor behind the ceremonial stage. But the rebel leader had anticipated this move. Two of his soldiers pushed through the crowd and blocked the corridor entrance, cutting off the escape route before the royal family could reach it. Marcus saw the situation immediately. If those rebels held their position, the princess would be trapped in the center of the hall. He fired twice more toward the attackers near the corridor entrance, forcing them to move behind a large stone sculpture near the wall. The brief distraction allowed several palace guards to move closer to the platform and form a defensive line around the king and princess. The rebel leader now noticed Marcus clearly for the first time. Through the smoke and flashing weapons, he saw the human warrior standing behind the broken banquet table, calmly firing the stolen rifle with deadly accuracy. The rebel leader's helmet sensors quickly identified Marcus as a human, something that clearly surprised him. Humans were not supposed to be here, and certainly not fighting with this level of skill inside the palace. The rebel leader raised his arm and pointed directly toward Marcus, while shouting orders to two of his soldiers. The fighters immediately turned their attention toward the human warrior, advancing cautiously while using their shield devices to protect themselves from incoming fire. Marcus understood their intention instantly. They wanted to remove the unexpected threat before continuing their assault on the royal family. Marcus stepped away from the table just as a powerful blast struck it from the front, shattering the metal surface into fragments. He rolled across the polished floor toward another pillar and quickly regained his balance. His movements were fast and controlled, each step calculated to keep him moving while still maintaining a clear line of fire. The two rebels advanced closer, their shields glowing brightly as they absorbed the shots fired by the palace guards behind Marcus. They believed the shields would protect them long enough to eliminate the human threat. But Marcus had already studied their equipment during the fight. Instead of firing directly at their armor, Marcus aimed for the small shield generators attached to their belts. He fired two quick shots. The first blast struck the generator on the left rebel, causing the shield to flicker violently before collapsing completely. The second blast hit the other generator seconds later, and leaving both attackers exposed. Without the shields protecting them, the rebels suddenly realized their mistake. Marcus fired again before they could react, striking one of them in the shoulder and forcing him to drop his weapon. The second rebel attempted to retreat toward the entrance, but a palace guard on the balcony fired a precise shot that knocked the attacker to the ground. Across the hall, the rebel leader saw his fighters falling one by one. The situation was no longer unfolding according to his plan. The palace guards were regrouping, the crowd had begun escaping through the side exits, and the unexpected human warrior was disrupting every attempt to reach the royal platform. The rebel leader stepped forward, pushing through the remaining fighters while aiming his own weapon toward Marcus. unlike the other attackers, and his armor was heavier and reinforced with additional plating. His helmet's visor glowed red as he studied the human across the battlefield. For a moment, the chaos of the hall seemed to focus around the two of them. The rebel leader raised his weapon slowly. Marcus lifted the rifle in response, his eyes steady and focused. The battle inside the royal wedding hall had just entered its most dangerous moment. The shattered royal hall had fully transformed into a battlefield. Broken decorations covered the polished floor, smoke from damaged weapons drifted through the air, and frightened nobles rushed toward the side corridors as palace guards guided them to safety. The once beautiful wedding ceremony had turned into a desperate fight for survival. In the middle of this chaos stood Marcus Hale, the human warrior who had arrived as a simple guest, but now found himself standing between the royal family and the attackers who had come to destroy the kingdom's future. Across the hall, the rebel leader stepped forward with heavy confidence. His armor was stronger than the others, built with thick, dark plates that reflected the bright flashes of energy fire around him. His helmet hid his face completely, but the glowing red visor focused directly on Marcus, as if measuring him. The leader moved slowly, not rushing like the other rebels had done earlier. He understood that the human warrior was not an ordinary opponent. Every fallen rebel around the hall proved that Marcus was far more dangerous than anyone had expected. Marcus kept his rifle raised, his breathing steady while he studied the enemy leader approaching him. And the human warrior quickly noticed the reinforced armor around the rebel's chest and shoulders, which meant direct shots would not easily penetrate the protective layers. However, Marcus also noticed small joints in the armor near the arms and neck where the plates connected. Those areas were weaker points in the design. Years of battlefield experience had taught him that no armor was perfect. Behind Marcus, palace guards continued pushing the remaining guests toward safety while forming a defensive wall around the king and princess. Princess Valyra had been moved slightly away from the destroyed platform and now stood beside two royal guards near the rear corridor entrance. Even in the middle of the chaos, she remained calm, watching the battle unfold with sharp attention. Oh, she could see the human warrior standing alone between the attackers and the royal family, and it was becoming clear to everyone in the hall that he was the reason the rebels had not already reached the princess. The rebel leader suddenly fired his weapon. A powerful energy blast shot across the hall toward Marcus with explosive force. Marcus moved instantly, diving behind a broken stone pillar as the blast struck the marble surface and shattered it into fragments. Dust and debris filled the air around him. The rebel leader advanced forward, firing again and again, each shot destroying more of the decorative pillars and furniture in the hall. Marcus rolled across the floor to avoid another blast and quickly fired back. His shot struck the rebel leader's shoulder armor, creating a bright flash but failing to break through the heavy plating. The rebel leader barely slowed down, continuing his advance with calm determination. He raised his weapon again and fired toward Marcus's position, forcing the human warrior to move once more to avoid being trapped behind the collapsing pillar. The two fighters circled each other slowly inside the ruined hall, while the remaining rebels and palace guards exchanged fire around them. Marcus understood that the longer this fight lasted, the more dangerous the situation would become for the princess. The rebel leader was clearly trying to distract him, while the remaining attackers searched for another path to the royal family. Marcus quickly glanced across the hall and noticed two rebels attempting to move quietly along the outer wall toward the corridor where Princess Valyra stood. They believed the human warrior was too focused on their leader to notice them. They were wrong. Marcus fired a quick burst toward them before turning his attention back to the rebel leader. The sudden attack forced the two rebels to dive behind a statue near the wall, delaying their movement long enough for a group of palace guards to intercept them. The rebel leader seemed to realize what Marcus had done. He lowered his weapon slightly and spoke through a loud voice amplifier built into his helmet. His voice echoed across the damaged hall with cold confidence. "You are skilled, human," the rebel leader said. "But this fight is already decided. The princess belongs to us." Marcus did not answer. Instead, he adjusted his stance and fired again, aiming for the small joint between the armor plates on the leader's arm. The shot struck the target with a sharp flash, causing the rebel leader to step backward for the first time since the fight began. The impact clearly surprised him. The human warrior had just proven that his armor was not invincible. Angered by the sudden injury, the rebel leader activated something attached to his belt. A faint energy shield flickered around him, forming a glowing barrier that would absorb the next few attacks. He charged forward aggressively, closing the distance between himself and Marcus while firing his weapon repeatedly. Marcus moved quickly to avoid the incoming blasts, but the rebel leader was now too close for a long-distance fight. Within seconds, the two opponents stood only a few meters apart inside the shattered hall. The rebel leader suddenly dropped his rifle and pulled a heavy combat blade from his armor. The blade vibrated with energy as it activated, glowing with a dangerous blue light capable of cutting through most materials. Marcus immediately understood the challenge being offered. The rebel leader wanted a close fight. Marcus lowered the rifle slowly and placed it aside. He reached toward his belt and removed a compact human combat knife. Compared to the large alien blade, it looked small, but the steel was strong and designed for survival battles in extreme environments. For a moment, the two fighters stood facing each other inside the damaged wedding hall while the rest of the battle continued around them. Palace guards and rebels exchanged fire across the room, but both sides seemed to sense that something important was happening between the two warriors in the center of the chaos. The rebel leader attacked first, swinging his glowing blade toward Marcus with brutal force. Marcus stepped aside quickly, allowing the blade to cut through the broken remains of a marble column instead of his body. The energy blade sliced through the stone easily, proving how dangerous it was. Marcus responded immediately with a fast strike toward the leader's injured arm. His knife hit the weak joint in the armor again, forcing the rebel leader to stumble backward with a loud metallic impact. The fight had become personal now. The rebel leader attacked again with another powerful swing, but Marcus moved with speed and precision, avoiding the blade while striking at the weaker parts of the armor. The battle was fast and violent, each movement carrying the risk of death. Across the hall, Princess Valyra watched with intense focus. She could see the human warrior fighting with incredible control despite the chaos around him. He was not simply attacking with strength. Every movement was careful and deliberate, designed to wear down the stronger opponent slowly. The rebel leader suddenly rushed forward again with a final powerful strike aimed directly at Marcus's chest. Marcus waited until the last possible second. Then he moved. The human warrior stepped aside and drove his knife directly into the damaged joint beneath the rebel leader's shoulder armor. The blade pierced deep into the weakened point in the armor, causing the rebel leader to freeze in shock. For a moment, the hall became silent around them. The rebel leader staggered backward, dropping his glowing blade as the energy field around his armor flickered and collapsed. Without their leader commanding them, the remaining rebels hesitated. And that hesitation was enough. Palace guards quickly overwhelmed the remaining attackers, forcing them to surrender or retreat toward the destroyed entrance. Within minutes, the battle inside the royal wedding hall was over. The rebels had failed, and the human warrior still stood. The royal hall slowly began to fall quiet after the violent battle that had shattered the wedding ceremony. Smoke drifted through the air while palace guards moved carefully across the damaged floor, securing the remaining rebels and helping injured guests. Broken pillars, shattered decorations, and overturned tables were scattered across the once beautiful hall. Only a short time earlier it had been filled with music and celebration. Now it looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. Marcus Hale stood near the center of the hall, breathing steadily as the last of the rebel fighters were taken into custody. The rebel leader lay unconscious on the floor where the human warrior had defeated him. Guards quickly surrounded the fallen attacker and placed restraint devices on his armor to prevent him from activating any hidden weapons. Several royal medics rushed toward the wounded guards and guests, working quickly to stabilize anyone injured during the attack. Marcus slowly wiped the dust from his hands and looked around the hall. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension in the air remained heavy. Many of the alien nobles had gathered near the side exits where palace security kept them protected. They watched the human warrior carefully, whispering among themselves. Only minutes earlier, many of them had doubted the decision to invite a human to the royal wedding. Now, those same nobles had witnessed the human warrior fight with calm precision while saving the royal family from certain disaster. Across the hall, the royal guards finally escorted Princess Valyra and King Thalrin away from the destroyed ceremonial platform. The princess looked shaken, but unharmed. Her glowing wedding dress was slightly torn near the edge where pieces of debris had fallen during the battle. Yet she carried herself with quiet strength as she walked beside her father. The king's expression was calm and thoughtful, and his eyes carefully studying the scene around him. When King Thalrin's gaze reached Marcus, the ruler of Valyra paused for a moment. The two men looked at each other across the ruined hall. Marcus lowered his head slightly in respectful acknowledgement, but he said nothing. He was simply a soldier who had done what any trained warrior would do when innocent lives were threatened. King Thalrin slowly walked toward him. The palace guards nearby stepped aside to allow the king to approach the human warrior. As the king moved through the hall, the alien nobles became silent. They understood that something important was about to happen. The king stopped a few steps in front of Marcus and studied him carefully for several seconds. Marcus noticed that the ruler did not look surprised by what had happened. Instead, the king seemed almost satisfied. "You fought well," King Thalrin said in a calm voice that carried clearly through the damaged hall. Marcus nodded respectfully. "I did what was necessary to protect the princess and the guests." The king looked around the hall briefly, observing the captured rebels and the guards restoring order to the palace. Then his attention returned to Marcus. "Many in this room wondered why I invited a human warrior to a royal wedding," the king continued. "Some believed it was a strange decision. Others believed it was a mistake." Marcus remained silent, waiting for the king to finish speaking. The king stepped slightly closer and lowered his voice so that only Marcus and the nearby guards could hear his next words. "I knew this attack might happen." Marcus's expression changed slightly, although he kept his posture steady. The king continued explaining. "For several weeks, my intelligence officers had discovered signs of a rebel operation targeting the royal ceremony. Their plan was to strike during the wedding, when the palace would be filled with guests and the guards would be spread thin protecting them. Unfortunately, the rebels had spies inside the kingdom who were watching our security preparations. If I had increased the number of guards openly, the attackers might have delayed their plan and tried again later under different conditions." Marcus understood immediately. The king had allowed the ceremony to continue normally in order to draw the rebels into revealing themselves. The king continued speaking. "My advisors suggested several possible solutions. Some recommended canceling the wedding, and others suggested moving the ceremony to a secret location, but those options would have shown fear to our enemies. I needed another solution. I needed someone who the rebels would never expect." The king looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "A human." Marcus slowly realized what the king was telling him. "You invited me because you expected the attack," Marcus said quietly. "Yes," the king replied. "My intelligence officers informed me about your reputation long before this ceremony. They told me about your service on the frontier worlds, about the rescue missions you completed, and about the battles where you protected civilians even when your own forces had already retreated. I believed that if the rebels attacked tonight, having you inside the palace would give us an advantage they could not predict." Marcus remained silent for a moment as he considered the king's words. He had assumed he was simply invited as a diplomatic guest representing humanity, but the truth was far more strategic. "You used me as insurance," Marcus finally said. The king gave a small, respectful nod. "I placed my trust in you." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Around them, the palace guards continued restoring order while medics assisted the injured. The alien nobles still watched the conversation carefully, trying to understand what their king would do next. Princess Valyra slowly approached the two men. Her expression was calmer now, though the events of the attack were still fresh in her mind. She looked directly at Marcus with clear gratitude. You saved many lives tonight," she said sincerely, "including mine." Marcus gave a polite nod. "I only did what was necessary." The princess smiled slightly before stepping beside her father again. King Thalrin looked around the hall one final time before raising his voice so that everyone nearby could hear him. "Tonight, our kingdom has witnessed something important," the king said. "A warrior from another world stood in defense of Valyra when our enemies tried to strike from the shadows. He fought not for reward or honor, but simply because protecting others was the right thing to do." The alien nobles listened carefully as the king continued speaking. "Many of you believed humans were unpredictable or dangerous," the king said. "Tonight you have seen the truth, as humans are dangerous only to those who threaten peace." The king turned back toward Marcus. "And that is why I will make a decision that will surprise many of you." The hall became completely silent as everyone waited to hear what the ruler of Valyra would say next. Because the king had already decided what role the human warrior would play in the future of the kingdom. The royal hall of Valyra was slowly returning to order, though the signs of the battle were still everywhere. Palace guards had finished securing the remaining rebels, and royal engineers had begun sealing the destroyed entrance where the attackers had forced their way inside. Broken decorations and damaged pillars still covered parts of the floor, reminding everyone how close the kingdom had come to losing its future in a single violent moment. The alien nobles who had once gathered for celebration now stood quietly around the hall, speaking in low voices as they watched the king and the human warrior at the center of the room. Only a short time earlier, many of those same nobles had looked at Marcus Hale with suspicion or doubt. Some had believed the king had made a mistake by inviting a human soldier to such an important royal event. Humans were known across the galaxy for their strength and their willingness to fight, but they were not often welcomed into royal ceremonies among the ancient alien civilizations. Tonight, however, those doubts had vanished. Every person in the hall had witnessed what the human warrior had done when the rebels attacked. They had seen him stand alone between danger and the royal family, fighting with calm precision while the entire celebration collapsed into chaos. King Thalrin stood tall near the center of the damaged hall, his royal cloak resting across his shoulders as he looked across the gathered nobles and guards. His voice had always carried natural authority, but tonight it carried something more powerful. It carried certainty. The king slowly raised his hand, signaling for silence. The conversations across the hall faded until only the quiet sounds of the palace remained. Everyone present understood that the king was about to make an important announcement. "Tonight," King Thalrin began, his voice echoing clearly across the chamber, "our kingdom faced an attack designed to break our unity and destroy the future of Valyra. The rebels believed they could strike during a moment of peace and celebration, believing our guards would be unprepared and our guests too frightened to resist." He paused briefly while looking around the hall, allowing his words to settle into the minds of those listening. "But they were wrong," the king continued calmly. "They were wrong because courage does not depend on numbers or titles. Courage depends on the choices made in moments of danger. The king slowly turned toward Marcus Hale, who still stood quietly near the center of the hall. "This human warrior chose to stand and fight when others might have run," the king said. "He defended our people, protected my daughter, and stopped the leader of the rebels before their plan could succeed." The nobles listened carefully, many of them nodding in agreement as they remembered the battle that had taken place only minutes earlier. And King Thalrin continued speaking, his voice strong and clear. "For generations, the kingdoms of this region have believed that humans were outsiders. Many believed they were unpredictable and too dangerous to trust. But tonight we have witnessed the truth with our own eyes." He gestured toward Marcus. "Humans are dangerous only to those who threaten peace." A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Even the alien nobles who had earlier whispered criticism now looked toward Marcus with new respect. Princess Valyra stepped forward beside her father, her expression calm and proud. She had watched the entire battle from only a short distance away, and she knew exactly how close the rebels had come to reaching her before the human warrior intervened. The king raised his hand again for silence. I promised earlier that I would make a decision that would surprise many of you," he said. The entire hall grew quiet again. Marcus stood still, listening carefully, though he had not expected to become the focus of such attention. In his mind, he was simply a soldier who had done what his training demanded. King Thalrin took one step closer to him. "Marcus Hale of Earth," the king said clearly. "Tonight you have proven not only your strength in battle, but your loyalty to those you chose to protect. Such loyalty is rare, even among the greatest warriors of the galaxy." The king turned slightly so that everyone in the hall could hear his next words. "Therefore, I declare that from this day forward, Marcus Hale will serve as the royal guardian of Valyra." The announcement echoed through the hall. For a moment, the nobles were completely silent as they processed the meaning of the king's decision. No human had ever been given such a position in the history of the kingdom. The royal guardian was not merely a soldier. It was one of the highest honors a warrior could receive, placing that individual among the most trusted protectors of the royal family. Princess Valyra smiled slightly as she looked toward Marcus, clearly approving of her father's decision. King Thalrin continued speaking. "The royal guardian does not belong to any single world," the king explained. "The royal guardian belongs to the protection of peace itself. Tonight, a human warrior has proven worthy of that responsibility." Slowly, one of the alien nobles stepped forward and lowered his head respectfully toward Marcus. Then another noble did the same. Then within moments, dozens of representatives from different worlds followed the gesture, acknowledging the human warrior who had protected them all. Marcus stood quietly as the meaning of the moment settled around him. He had come to Valyra expecting only to attend a diplomatic celebration. Instead, he had fought a battle inside a royal palace and now found himself honored by an entire kingdom. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice calm but sincere. "I did not fight for recognition," he said. "I fought because innocent lives were in danger." The king nodded approvingly. "And that is exactly why you are worthy of this honor," King Thalrin replied. The tension inside the hall slowly faded as the reality of the moment settled in. What had begun as a night of danger had ended with something unexpected. Then the attack meant to weaken the kingdom had instead strengthened it, bringing together warriors from different worlds who now shared a deeper understanding of each other. Outside the palace, the first light of morning began to appear across the horizon of Valyra. As the rising sun illuminated the glowing towers of the capital city, a new story had already begun spreading across the stars. It was the story of a human warrior who attended an alien princess's wedding, and by the next morning became the king's chosen guardian.